G'day ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me on this, my journey into the constraints-led approach for BJJ. My name is Sam Battlefields, and today I ran the class that I was going to run yesterday, but with more people in it. We started with our usual tag. I do want to change this format. I want to look at the constraints. People are getting very used to it, and so therefore aren't experimenting, or they are experimenting, but because of the current level of constraints and what everyone's been doing, it's making it difficult. Plus, there is no... what's the fucking word? Impetus when there is no reaction required from just tagging the shoulder. There's no pullback or anything like that. So that's something that I will try to address in the future. And I think part of that will come down again to connecting and making connections with grappling games. In saying that though, I think I might just go back to boxing tag with torso and shoulders. Really try and reiterate a touch to the shoulder is a head punch and the touch to the torso is obviously a body punch. I think it's got too much like tag again, even though that's what we call it. I think it's really good as a dynamic warm-up. If you consider you're changing levels, trying to move in quick, trying to move out quick, but ultimately I do think it is a good warm-up, so I just want to play with the constraints a little bit. We then moved on from that to a connections game, trying to get the tricep on the chest. The guys are getting really good at this now, and so it's difficult even for me with these less experienced guys to get round to the side. The good thing is we will build from this to chest on back, etc, etc. There were a couple of good insights as well, and on top of that I can see I've brought things to focus that people are now using in the games. From there we moved on to a guard game. Simple game, person in a supine open guard, feet in front of them. Their goal was to keep their soles of their feet on the person as much as possible, and the person on top was to try and get past those legs to a pin. The major constraint for the person on the bottom was that they weren't allowed to use their arms, and this resulted in some really cool outcomes with a whole heap of emergent behavior, such as keeping one leg long, one leg short. I've seen this taught in classes before, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, it makes sense, but until you put it into action, you don't feel it. Another thing I was doing with my connections was trying to implement the same stuff I've been doing on top, which is just create tension, feel the person with whatever I'm connected to, so that when they move, I'm ready to move with them. My stand-up T-Rex game had so many similarities with this supine legs between opponent and myself. It was quite uncanny, really. I can't really explain it, and I don't want to go off into one of those internal cued tangents that I went on yesterday, but I could feel when they were shifting to one side, and it actually allowed me, because they had some sort of connection to my leg that I had put on their torso, and that connection, because I had put tension on it, I felt where they were going, and so I was able to get my hips in a direction where I was able to get my other foot on. So I need to work out what the external cues are there in order to impart that knowledge directly or indirectly. The final game was starting in side control. Person on top was going to have the beginnings of a crossface, but not quite a crossface, and their arm under their opposite shoulder. Person on the bottom, their goal was to push on the torso of the person on top with their forearms, which meant that they had to get those arms back out of what is essentially a shitty side control position, with the final caveat to the task that they had to get on their side. The more experienced guys were able to do this fairly easily, and I noticed that the new guy, who's only been training about 3 weeks, was getting a little stuck. Part of it was because the more experienced guy was not giving him much quarter, but one thing I noticed, which was really cool, was that he'd already got the elbow against their hip. So he'd done about 50% of what is essentially a game with 3 or 4 moving parts. So as a beginner, just getting that first frame in against the hip is something that I would have gamified with him, and this is giving myself a bit of shit, if I had been a bit more on the ball with what was going on in the room. I went and sat with him, pointed out that he actually did something really cool, and his training partner unfortunately said something that I'd really want to get out of my room because they aren't conducive to the idea of of experimentation and exploration. And what he said was, your first mistake, I don't believe there are mistakes. There are more efficient ways of doing something, and if you're experimenting and exploring, then there are no mistakes. I want you to be able to find where the things are that work, and sometimes, especially really early on in your career, you're going to test out things that don't work. Oddly enough though, what he was doing was not all that bad. I then worked with him with a little bit of a game where we were just trying to get that arm in onto his hip, and we discussed the importance of controlling that power center of the body. If you'd like to know more, go to battlefieldsgrappling.com.au and fill in the form. Everyone else, like, comment, subscribe.